Every morning at 6:45 a.m., the same routine played out in a small one-bedroom apartment on the north side of the city. Alarm buzzed. One hand slapped it quiet. Eyes stayed closed for another 30 seconds, just long enough to gather courage for the day ahead. Then feet hit the cold floor and the quiet ritual of getting ready began. Shower, simple breakfast, ironed blouse, black slacks, and the same pair of sensible shoes that didn't squeak on office floors. Backpack zipped with a notebook, a pen that never skipped, and a thermos of strong black coffee. No sugar, no cream. Just the way it helped keep the nerves steady. The commute was never short. 2 buses and a 10-minute walk through downtown streets already buzzing with suits and lattes. She kept her eyes down, not out of rudeness but habit. Growing up, she'd learned early that staying quiet often meant staying safe. Less attention, fewer questions, smoother days. Her brother had been born deaf, and their home had always been a mix of spoken words and silent conversations. She'd learned to sign before she could read. It wasn't special to her, it was just life. But outside their apartment, the world moved fast, loud, and rarely paused to notice someone who didn't speak unless spoken to. Now at 21, she was interning at a mid-sized marketing firm called Viridian Solutions. The position had been hard-won. A summer gig that stretched into fall because she showed up early, stayed late, and never complained. Her desk sat in the far corner of the open office near the supply closet and the printer that jammed every Thursday. She didn't mind. From there, she could watch everything without being seen. The sales team's high fives after closing a deal. The creative directors arguing passionately over font choices. The HR manager who always brought homemade cookies on Fridays. It all felt like a play she was watching from backstage. Close enough to hear the lines, but never expected to step into the spotlight. Her tasks were simple. Organize client files, update spreadsheets, proofread emails, refill the coffee pot. Nothing flashy. Nothing that required her to stand in front of a room or pitch an idea. And that was fine. She preferred it that way. Speaking in meetings made her palms sweat. Making small talk by the water cooler felt like performing without a script. So she stayed in her lane, did her work well, and hoped that quiet reliability would be enough to earn a recommendation. Or maybe, if she was lucky, a full-time offer when the internship ended. She hadn't told anyone at Viridian about her brother, or about sign language. It just never came up. In job interviews, people asked about strengths, weaknesses, career goals, not whether you could communicate without sound. And honestly, she didn't think it mattered here. Marketing was about catchy slogans, social media trends, and data analytics. Not silence, not hands moving like poetry in the air. So she kept that part of herself tucked away like an old photo album stored in a closet, cherished but not on display. Her coworkers were friendly enough but distant. They'd say good morning as they passed her desk, sometimes ask if she wanted anything from the cafe downstairs. But no one really knew her. Not her favorite book, a dog-eared copy of The Little Prince. Not her habit of sketching tiny flowers in the margins of her notes. Not the way she hummed old lullabies under her breath when she was stressed. She liked it that way mostly. Less chance of saying the wrong thing. Less chance of being misunderstood. But there were moments. Small, quiet moments when she wished someone would see her. Not just the intern who filed reports on time, but the person behind the quiet smile, the one who stayed up late helping her brother navigate job applications. Because interviews were harder when you couldn't hear the questions, the one who could tell someone's mood just by the way their hands moved, even if they weren't signing. She carried that awareness with her like a second heartbeat. It made her careful, observant, kind in ways that didn't need words. One Monday, the office buzzed with news. A big client was coming in later that week. Someone important, a founder of a sustainable packaging startup, self-made, innovative, and, as the account manager mentioned offhandedly while printing brochures, completely deaf. The team exchanged glances. Someone muttered, "Did we book an interpreter?" Another shrugged. "I think HR was supposed to handle it." The conversation moved on quickly, absorbed into the usual chaos of deadlines and coffee runs. But she heard it, and the words stuck in her mind like a pebble in a shoe, small but impossible to ignore. She didn't say anything. Why would she? She wasn't on the client team. She wasn't even supposed to be in that meeting. Her job was to prep the presentation slides, double-check the stats, and make sure the projector worked. That was it. Still, that night she lay awake longer than usual. She imagined the client walking into a room full of people who couldn't talk to him. The awkward pauses, the frustrated smiles, the way people sometimes spoke louder, as if volume could fix silence. She knew that look. The polite mask hiding embarrassment, the quick glance away when eye contact became too heavy. She'd seen it too many times in grocery stores, at school events, even in doctors' offices. It wasn't malice, just ignorance, and it hurt even when no one meant it to. Tuesday came. She arrived early, as always. The office was quiet, just the hum of computers booting up. She made coffee, organized her desk, and opened the client file. As she reviewed the slides, she double-checked every number, every bullet point. She even added subtle visual cues, icons, color blocks that might help convey meaning without relying solely on spoken words. It was a small thing, maybe pointless, but it made her feel like she was doing something, anything. By Wednesday, the tension was building. The account lead was stressed. Still no confirmation on the interpreter, she sighed, rubbing her temples. If he shows up and we can't communicate, this whole pitch is dead. No one had a solution. They talked about writing things down, using a translation app, even bringing in a whiteboard. But everyone knew it wasn't the same. Real conversation, trust, nuance, connection, needed more than scribbled notes. She stood by the printer, waiting for the final deck to finish, listening to the conversation drift past her like background noise. Her heart thumped not from fear exactly, but from a strange rising pressure in her chest. Like a door she'd kept locked for years was rattling on its hinges. She thought about her brother, how proud he'd been when he landed his first real job, how he'd practiced signing his answers in the mirror for weeks. She thought about how much easier it would have been if just one person in that interview room had known how to listen with their eyes. But this wasn't her meeting. She was just the intern. What if she offered and they said no? What if they thought she was overstepping? What if she messed it up? The doubt swirled loud and sharp. She took a slow breath the way her brother taught her. Inhale through the nose, hold, exhale through the mouth, calm, clear. She didn't decide right then. She just kept working. Made more coffee, fixed a typo in slide 12, watched the clock tick toward Thursday. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly. She wore her favorite blouse, the soft blue one that made her feel a little braver. She didn't know why. Maybe her body knew something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. At 9:30 a.m., the client arrived. He walked in with a calm confidence, dressed in a crisp linen shirt and dark jeans, a leather portfolio under one arm. His eyes scanned the room, not nervously but with quiet assessment. The account manager greeted him with a handshake and a too-wide smile, then froze, realizing they couldn't speak. She fumbled for her phone, clearly about to open a notes app. The rest of the team hovered awkwardly, shifting weight, avoiding eye contact. That's when she saw it, the flicker in the client's expression. Not anger, not impatience, just disappointment, the kind that comes from being reminded once again that the world isn't built for you. Something inside her snapped. Before she could second-guess it, she stepped forward. Not dramatically, not with a speech. Just a few quiet steps from the edge of the room into the center of the tension. She raised her hands, palm open, fingers relaxed, and signed, "Hello, my name is... I can help." The room went still, the client's eyes locked onto hers. Recognition, relief. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He signed back, "Thank you." No one else moved. They just watched, stunned, as two people who'd never met before began speaking in a language made of gestures, expressions, and space. It wasn't magic. It wasn't perfect. But it was human. And in that moment, the quiet intern wasn't invisible anymore. She didn't know it yet, but someone else had been watching too, from a glass-walled office high above the floor. Someone who saw not just an intern stepping up, but a rare kind of courage. The kind that shows up not for applause, but because it's the right thing to do. But that was a story for another day. For now, she focused on the man in front of her, on the meeting that needed to happen, on the words her hands could finally say out loud, even without sound. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was hiding. She felt like she belonged. The moment her hands moved into the first sign, everything else in the room seemed to pause, like someone had pressed mute on the whole world. The hum of the air conditioner, The distant clatter of keyboards, even the nervous tapping of a pen against a desk, it all faded into the background. All that was left was the quiet space between two people who suddenly understood each other. The client's shoulders relaxed. His eyes, which had been scanning the room with polite detachment, softened with recognition. He signed back quickly, fluidly. "You know ASL?" She nodded, fingers shaping the reply. "Yes, my brother is deaf." A small smile touched his lips. Not the kind people give when they're just being polite, but the real kind, the kind that reaches the eyes. He signed, "That's good. Very good." Behind them, the account team stood frozen, caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. One of them whispered, "She signs?" Another just stared, mouth slightly open. No one had seen this coming. To them, she was the quiet intern who brought extra pens to meetings and never said more than 2 words at a time. Now, here she was, bridging a gap no one else even knew how to approach. She turned slightly toward the team, still signing as she spoke aloud for their benefit. "He says he's ready whenever you are." Her voice was calm, but inside her heart was racing like she'd just sprinted up 10 flights of stairs. She hadn't planned this, hadn't rehearsed it, hadn't even let herself imagine it happening. But now that it was real, it felt right, like slipping into a pair of shoes she'd forgotten she owned. Comfortable, familiar, made for her. The account lead, still flustered but clearly grateful, quickly gathered herself. "Okay, great. Let's get started." She gestured toward the conference table. "Please have a seat." The client nodded and took his place. She sat beside him, not too close, not too far, just close enough to interpret without straining. She kept her posture open, her expressions clear. Interpreting wasn't just about words. It was about tone, pace, emotion. A pitch wasn't just facts and figures, it was energy, confidence, vision. And she had to carry all of that in her hands and face. As the presentation began, she listened carefully to every sentence, then translated it into ASL with precision. When the account lead said, "Our campaign increased engagement by 140%, she didn't just sign the numbers, she emphasized them with raised eyebrows and a slight forward lean, showing how impressive that result was. When the creative director described the brand's bold, earth-friendly identity, she used expansive gestures to convey boldness, then gentler, flowing movements for earth-friendly, letting the meaning breathe in the air. The client watched her closely, but not in a way that made her nervous. It was the look of someone finally being seen, not as a problem to solve, but as a person to connect with. Every so often he'd nod or tilt his head slightly when something intrigued him. Once, when the team mentioned a feature that used recycled ocean plastic, his eyes lit up and he signed to her. "That matters to me." She nodded and made sure to highlight that point again when the team moved on. Halfway through, the account lead stumbled over a technical term, something about cross-platform algorithmic targeting. She paused, frowning, trying to rephrase it. The client's expression flickered with confusion. That's when she gently stepped in. Still signing, she leaned slightly toward him and added, "It means they use smart software to show your ads to the right people on different apps and websites." He nodded immediately. "Ah, got it." She gave a small, almost invisible smile. That was the thing about interpreting. It wasn't just repeating words. It was making sure understanding happened. And sometimes that meant simplifying, clarifying, humanizing the jargon. The team noticed. They saw how the client's engagement deepened after that moment. How he started asking questions not through written notes, but through her with real curiosity. He wanted to know about timelines, about budget flexibility, about whether the team had worked with other socially conscious brands. Each question came with a thoughtful pause, a careful choice of signs. And each answer she gave back was clear, patient and full of respect. At one point, the creative director showed a mock-up of a new ad, a short video featuring a child planting a tree, with soft music and a voiceover about growing a better future. The client watched the screen, then turned to her, signing, "Is there captioning?" She glanced at the video. There wasn't. She hesitated for just a second, then turned to the team. "He's asking if the final version will include captions." The creative director blinked. "Oh, we hadn't planned on it, but we absolutely can." She signed the reply. The client nodded, but his expression was neutral, neither upset nor pleased. just aware. She knew that look. It was the look of someone used to being an afterthought. She leaned in slightly and added, signing only to him, "I'll make sure they do it right." His eyes met hers. He gave a slow, grateful nod. No words needed. By the time the meeting wrapped up, the mood in the room had shifted completely. What had started as a potential disaster had turned into one of the most engaged client sessions the team could remember. The client shook hands with everyone, yes, even without hearing, he used touch and eye contact to convey warmth, and then turned to her last. He placed a hand gently on her forearm, looked her straight in the eyes and signed, "Thank you. You made this possible." Her throat tightened. She just nodded, signing back, "It was my honor." He smiled, then walked out with the account lead, already deep in conversation about next steps. The moment the door closed, the room exploded. "Did you see that? I had no idea she could do that."
How long has she known sign language?
Why didn't she say anything before? She stayed seated for a moment, letting the noise wash over her. Her hands felt warm, almost buzzing. She flexed her fingers, suddenly aware of how much they'd done in the last hour. She stood slowly, gathering her notebook and pen, ready to slip back into the background like she always did. But this time, people didn't let her. The account lead turned to her, eyes shining. "Seriously, thank you. You saved that meeting. You made that meeting." The creative director added, "And you explained our stuff better than we did." She mumbled something about just helping out, but they weren't having it. For the first time they saw her, not as the quiet intern, but as someone with a skill, a perspective, a depth they hadn't noticed before. She went back to her desk, but the day didn't return to normal. People kept stopping by, not to ask for coffee runs or file checks, but to say things like, "That was amazing," or "My cousin is learning ASL. Do you have any tips?" One junior designer even brought her a cookie from the break room saying, "You earned this." She smiled, thanked them, but inside she was still processing. Part of her was proud. Another part was terrified. What if they expected her to do this all the time now? What if they thought she was some kind of expert? She wasn't. She was just someone who grew up loving a person the world often forgot to include. And then there was the other thought, the quiet, nagging one. What if someone important saw? She hadn't noticed the glass-walled office upstairs, hadn't seen the figure standing there, watching the whole thing unfold. But later, as she walked to the break room to refill her water bottle, she passed the receptionist who was chatting with someone from HR, and the CEO was in the observation lounge during the whole meeting. The receptionist said, lowering her voice but not enough, "Saw everything." Her steps slowed. She didn't stop, didn't turn, but her stomach dropped like a stone. The CEO. She'd only seen him once, from across the lobby when he'd held the door for a delivery person. He seemed normal, not flashy, not loud, but still he was the top, the one who decided who stayed and who left, the one who shaped the company's future. And he'd seen her step into the spotlight without being asked, without permission. Panic fluttered in her chest. What if he thought she overstepped? What if he thought she was trying to show off? Interns weren't supposed to take charge. They were supposed to learn, observe, stay in line. She spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on her spreadsheets, but her mind kept drifting back to the meeting, the client's relieved smile, the way her hands had moved without hesitation, the weight of being truly useful in a way no one expected. That evening, as she walked home through the cooling city streets, the drizzle had turned into a soft rain. She didn't mind. The rhythm of her steps, the sound of tires on wet pavement, the glow of streetlights through the mist, it all felt grounding. She replayed the day in her head, not with regret, but with a strange new feeling. Maybe being seen wasn't so bad. Maybe her quiet strength wasn't something to hide. She didn't know what would happen next. Maybe nothing would come of it. Maybe the CEO would forget by tomorrow. But for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, what if this was the beginning of something, not fame, not a promotion, just being known for who she really was, and that, she realized as she turned the key in her apartment door, was worth more than any perfect spreadsheet or on-time coffee run. Inside, she kicked off her shoes, poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the rain trace paths down the glass. Somewhere out there, a client was probably emailing his team about how impressed he was with Viridian's thoughtful, inclusive approach. And somewhere upstairs in the office tower, a decision-maker was thinking about how rare it was to see someone act with quiet courage, without expecting anything in return. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that today, she hadn't stayed silent when silence would have been easier. And that small act of showing up for a stranger, for her brother, for herself, had changed everything. The office felt different the next morning, not in any obvious way, but in the quiet hum beneath everything. The coffee machine gurgled the same. The printer still jammed. People still rushed in late with half-eaten bagels. But something had shifted in the air, like the moment after a storm when the sky clears but the ground is still damp with change. She walked in early, as always hoping to slip into her usual rhythm before anyone noticed her. But it didn't work. 2 people said good morning before she even reached her desk. Not the usual mumbled greeting, but real ones with eye contact and smiles. The intern coordinator waved from across the room and gave a thumbs up. She ducked her head, cheeks warming, and pretended to be very interested in organizing paper clips. She didn't know it yet, but the ripple from yesterday's meeting had already reached the top. Up on the 7th floor, in an office with wide windows and shelves lined with books that actually looked red, the CEO sat with a steaming mug of tea and a notepad. He wasn't the type to micromanage. He believed good leaders hired smart people and got out of their way. But every so often he liked to watch, just observe how things really worked when no one knew they were being seen. He'd been in the observation lounge yesterday, reviewing quarterly reports when he noticed the tension in the main conference room below. He saw the client arrive, calm, composed, clearly used to navigating a hearing world. He saw the team fumble. He saw the panic flash across their faces when they realized they had no way to communicate. And then he saw her. He didn't know who she was at first. Just another young face in the sea of interns. But the moment she stepped forward, something about her changed. Her posture straightened, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. Her hands moved like they'd been waiting their whole life for this moment. And her eyes, steady, kind, focused, never left the client's face. He watched as she didn't just translate words, but meaning. When the team used jargon, she softened it into something human. When the client asked a question, she didn't just repeat it, she made sure it was understood. And when the creative team showed that video without captions, he saw the flicker of disappointment in the client's expression. And the way she leaned in almost imperceptibly to reassure him, that's when he knew. This wasn't just skill. It was care. After the meeting, he'd asked his assistant, who was the intern in the blue blouse. New marketing intern, came the reply. Started last summer, quiet, always on time. Find out everything you can, he'd said. Not in a demanding way, just curious. Like someone who'd just discovered a hidden room in a house they thought they knew well. Now sitting at his desk, he flipped through the notes his assistant had gathered. Standard stuff, college major, GPA, references. But none of it explained what he'd seen. So he dug deeper, not through files but through people. He called the head of HR. Did we know she knew ASL? No, came the surprised answer. She never mentioned it on her application or during onboarding. He smiled to himself. Of course she didn't. People like her didn't list kindness on their resumes. They just lived it. He thought back to his own past. Before he ran a company, he'd been a high school teacher in a rough neighborhood. He remembered a student, bright, quiet, who never spoke in class but wrote the most beautiful essays. One day, the boy's younger sister, who had cerebral palsy, came to the school play. The boy spent the whole time translating the performance into gestures and whispers only she understood. No one asked him to. He just did it. And in that moment, the teacher saw the real measure of a person, not grades, not confidence, but the willingness to make the world more accessible for someone else. That memory had stayed with him for 20 years. And yesterday he'd seen it again. He didn't want to swoop in with praise or promises. That wasn't his style. Real recognition wasn't about grand gestures. It was about creating space for someone to keep being who they already were. So he made a decision. He'd meet her. Not in a formal review, not with an audience, but quietly, human to human. But first he wanted to understand more. He walked down to the 6th floor later that morning, not as the CEO, but just as a visitor. He stopped by the marketing department under the pretense of checking on a campaign timeline. As he chatted with the department head, his eyes scanned the room. He saw her at her desk, head bent over a laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard, a half-finished sketch of a leaf in the corner of her notepad. She looked exactly like someone who preferred to work in the margins of life. He didn't approach her. Not yet. He just watched for a moment. The way she paused to help a coworker with a file. The way she smiled softly when someone told a joke she could barely hear over the office noise. She wasn't performing. She was just being back in his office. He drafted a short email to HR. Let's talk about accessibility, and about the intern who showed us what it really means. Meanwhile, down on the 6th floor, she tried to act normal. But her mind kept circling back to the client's face. The relief, the respect, the way he'd looked at her like she'd handed him a key to a door he'd been knocking on for years. She'd texted her brother that night. Just 2 words. I signed today. He'd replied instantly. I knew you would when it mattered. She hadn't told him about the CEO possibly watching. She didn't want to jinx it. Or maybe she was afraid that if she said it out loud, it would turn into something heavy. Expectations, pressure, disappointment. But the truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about it. What if he'd been disappointed? What if he thought she'd overstepped? Interns weren't supposed to take charge. They were supposed to learn, not lead. By lunchtime, she'd worked herself into a quiet spiral of doubt. She took her sandwich to the rooftop garden, the one no one ever used, and sat on a bench overlooking the city. The wind tugged at her hair. Below, traffic crawled like ants. She took a deep breath, trying to quiet the noise in her head. That's when she noticed something. On the far side of the roof, near the emergency exit, a man in a simple gray sweater stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the skyline. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't pacing, just present. She recognized him instantly. The CO. She froze, sandwich halfway to her mouth. Should she leave? Pretend she hadn't seen him? Say hello? Before she could decide, he turned. Their eyes met. He didn't look surprised, almost like he'd been expecting her. He walked over slowly, not with the brisk stride of someone in charge, but with the calm pace of someone used to listening more than talking. Mind if I join you? He asked, voice low and steady. She shook her head quickly, then realized that wasn't clear, so she said, No, of course not. He sat on the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The city hummed below them. Then he said, I saw what you did yesterday. Her stomach dropped. She kept her eyes on her sandwich. I just helped out. You did more than that, he said gently. You made someone feel seen, in a place where he probably expected to be invisible. She didn't know what to say, so she stayed quiet. He didn't seem to mind. I used to teach, he said after a pause. And I always told my students that the world doesn't need more loud voices. It needs more people who notice when someone's being left out and do something about it. She finally looked at him. His eyes were kind. Not probing, not judging, just seeing her. I didn't think anyone would care, she admitted softly. I care, he said, and I think the company should care more. He didn't offer her a promotion, didn't promise anything. He just asked questions. What was it like growing up with a deaf brother? Did she think the company could do better? Had she ever felt like her perspective wasn't welcome here? She answered honestly. About the grocery store clerks who shouted at her brother. About job interviews where interpreters weren't provided. About how exhausting it was to constantly explain that deaf wasn't the same as broken. He listened. Really listened. Not the way people do when they're just waiting to talk, but the way you listen to a song you've never heard before. Carefully, curiously, letting it sink in. When they finished talking, he stood. Thank you for your honesty, he said. And thank you for stepping up yesterday. Not everyone would have, she nodded, throat tight. He started to walk away, then turned back. One more thing, he said. You don't have to wait for permission to be who you are. The world needs that part of you, even here. Then he was gone, leaving her alone on the bench with her half-eaten sandwich and a heart that felt strangely lighter. She sat there for a long time, watching the clouds drift. For the first time, she didn't feel like an imposter in this corporate world. She felt like maybe, just maybe, there was room for her kind of quiet strength. Back inside, the office buzzed on as usual. But she walked through it differently now. Not hiding, not performing, just being. And somewhere upstairs, a CEO sat at his desk, writing a new agenda item for the next leadership meeting, building a company that doesn't just talk about inclusion, but lives it. He didn't know yet how it would unfold. But he knew one thing for sure. It would start with listening to the people who'd been speaking in silence all along. A week passed, and life at the office settled into a new kind of normal. The buzz from the client meeting hadn't died down. It had just changed shape. People still glanced her way, but not with shock anymore. Now it was more like quiet respect. The account team started asking her opinion on how to present ideas visually. The design group invited her to a brainstorming session about making their digital content more accessible. Even the IT guy stopped by to ask if she knew any good captioning software he could recommend to other departments. She said yes to everything she could, but carefully. She didn't want to overpromise. She wasn't an expert in corporate accessibility, just someone who'd lived it. Still, she shared what she knew, how automatic captions often got things wrong, how flashing animations could trigger seizures, how simple things like alt text on images or clear headings made a huge difference for screen readers. She spoke slowly, choosing her words like stepping stones across a stream, steady, thoughtful, never rushing. But beneath the calm surface, she was waiting. Ever since that conversation on the rooftop, she'd felt a quiet hum of anticipation, like the air before a summer storm. She didn't know what would happen next, only that something was coming. Then on a Tuesday morning, an email popped up in her inbox. Please stop by Human Resources at 10 a.m. today. It's about your role and future at Viridian. Her stomach flipped. She read it 3 times, searching for hidden meaning in the plain words. Your role and future, that sounded serious. Too serious for an intern. Was this it? Were they letting her go early? Maybe they'd decided she'd overstepped too far. Maybe the CEO had changed his mind after thinking it over. She spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on her tasks, but her fingers kept pausing over the keyboard. She rehearsed what she'd say if they asked her to leave. Thank you for the opportunity. I learned a lot. I'm sorry if I caused any trouble. But the words felt hollow, because deep down she didn't regret what she'd done, not for a second. At 9:55, she stood outside the HR office, smoothing her blouse, taking slow breaths the way her brother had taught her. She knocked lightly. Come in, a warm voice called. She stepped inside. The room was bright, with plants on the windowsill and framed photos of team events on the walls. The HR manager sat behind her desk, smiling, but not the polite, "We need to let you go" smile. This one reached her eyes, and then she saw him. The CEO was there too, sitting in a chair near the window, hands folded loosely in his lap. He gave her a small nod, the kind that said, "It's okay, you belong here." Her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. "Have a seat," the HR manager said gently. "We're not here for anything bad, I promise." She sat, perching on the edge of the chair, hands folded in her lap. The CEO leaned forward slightly. "After what happened last week with the client, I started thinking a lot about something you said on the roof, about how companies talk about inclusion but don't always live it." She nodded, not trusting her voice yet. "Well," he continued, "I realized Viridian is guilty of that too. We have statements on our website. We check boxes on forms. But when a deaf client walked through our door, we weren't ready. And that's on us, not on you." He paused, letting that sink in. "But you showed us a better way. Not with a presentation or a report. Just by being who you are." The HR manager picked up the thread. "We've been talking about how to make real changes, not just for clients, but for everyone who works here or walks through our doors. And we think you could help lead that." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes, you," the CEO said, smiling. "We'd like to create a new role, something we've never had before. An accessibility and inclusion liaison, someone who helps us design meetings, materials, and systems that work for all kinds of people. Not as an afterthought, but from the start." She blinked. "But I'm just an intern." "You're more than that," the HR manager said softly. "You've got lived experience. You understand communication in a way most of us don't. And you care enough to speak up, even when it's hard." The CEO added, "This wouldn't be about fixing people. It'd be about fixing the environment, making sure no one ever walks into a meeting feeling like they're a problem to solve." She thought of her brother filling out job applications, practicing interview answers in the mirror, dreading the moment he'd have to ask for accommodations. She thought of the client's relieved smile when she signed, "Hello." She thought of all the times she'd stayed quiet because she didn't want to make waves. Now, they were asking her to make waves on purpose. "What would I actually do?" she asked, voice steadier now. "Start small," the CEO said. "Run a workshop on basic ASL phrases for client-facing teams. Help us review our website for accessibility. Work with IT to set up captioning standards. Maybe even partner with local deaf organizations to learn from them. You'd report directly to me in HR, but you'd have real input." "And this would be a real job?" she asked, almost afraid to hope. "If you want it," the HR manager said. "We'd offer you a full-time position starting next month, after your internship ends. With benefits, a proper salary, and the support you need to succeed." Silence filled the room, but it wasn't heavy. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something new begins. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had signed "thank you" to her brother every night as a kid, that had taken notes in class, that had typed endless spreadsheets, and that just days ago had built a bridge between two worlds. "Yes," she said finally, looking up. "I'd like that." The CEO didn't clap or cheer. He just nodded like he'd known she'd say yes all along. "Good. Because the truth is, we need you more than you need us." Later, walking back to her desk, she felt like she was floating just above the floor. Not because of the job offer, though that was huge, but because for the first time her whole self was welcome. Not just the part that filed reports on time, but the part that signed "I love you" to her brother every morning. The part that noticed when someone was being left out. The part that cared enough to step forward even when her knees shook. When she sat down, she opened a blank document. At the top, she typed, "Accessibility starts here." She didn't know exactly what would go under it yet, but she knew it would be honest, human, built on real experience, not corporate slogans. Over the next few days, things moved quickly, but not chaotically. HR scheduled a meeting with the leadership team to introduce the new initiative. The CEO sent a company-wide email, not announcing her as a hero, but simply saying, "We're improving how we include everyone, and we're lucky to have someone with deep experience leading the way." People started stopping by her desk again, but this time, it was different. A designer asked how to choose color palettes that worked for colorblind users. A project manager wanted tips on running hybrid meetings that didn't leave remote or deaf participants behind. Even the receptionist asked if she could learn a few signs to greet deaf visitors properly. She said yes to all of it. Not because she had to, but because she finally could. One afternoon, she got a call from the client, the one from the meeting. He'd heard through the account team that she was leading a new inclusion effort. He didn't say much, just signed through the video call. "I knew you'd do this. Tell me how I can help." She smiled. "Just keep showing up," she signed back. That's how change starts. That night, she called her brother. She told him everything, the rooftop talk, the HR meeting, the new role. He listened quietly, then signed, "I always knew you'd find a place where your hands mattered as much as your words." She laughed, tears in her eyes. "They do now." The next Monday, she walked into the office wearing the same sensible shoes, but with her head a little higher. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was building. And the best part? She wasn't doing it alone, because somewhere along the way, her quiet act of courage had reminded everyone around her that inclusion isn't a policy, it's a practice. And it starts with one person choosing to see another and saying without words, "And you belong here." 6 months later, the office didn't just look different, it felt different. It wasn't because of fancy new furniture or flashy rebranding. It was in the small things. The automatic door opener by the front entrance that used to be broken, but now worked every time. The meeting rooms with clear glass walls so people could see if someone was signing inside. The company-wide email that always came with a plain text version for screen readers. The quiet hum of the captioning software running during every virtual call. And in the center of it all was her, not as a figurehead, not as a symbol, but as someone who showed up every day, listened deeply, and turned care into action. Her new role wasn't glamorous. There were no spotlight interviews or awards ceremonies. Most days she was knee-deep in spreadsheets, testing website contrast ratios, or sitting with the IT team to tweak the video conferencing setup. She ran monthly workshops, not big lectures, but cozy sessions in the break room with coffee and cookies, where people learned how to introduce themselves in ASL, how to describe images for blind colleagues, or why hearing impaired wasn't the right term. People came, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. One of the first to sign up was the account lead from that fateful meeting. "I never realized how much I assumed everyone experienced the world like I did," she admitted during a break. "Now I catch myself like, wait, is this slide readable? Is this meeting set up fairly? It's changed how I work." That was the thing. Real inclusion wasn't about grand gestures. It was about tiny shifts in awareness that added up over time. The client, the deaf entrepreneur, became one of Viridian's strongest partners. His packaging startup launched a campaign co-designed with their team, and it included not just captions, but full ASL interpretation in the ads. When asked why, he told a reporter, "Because for the first time, a company didn't just want my business, they wanted to understand me." He came back to the office often, not just for meetings, but to chat with her, to give feedback, to share stories from the deaf community. Once he brought a group of students from a local deaf high school for a tour. As they walked through the open office, their eyes lit up seeing signs on the walls. Not just emergency exits, but welcome, restroom, quiet space, all in ASL. One student signed to her, "This feels like a place where I could work someday." She just nodded, throat tight, and signed back, "You absolutely could." Upstairs, the CEO had made good on his word. Accessibility wasn't tucked into a corner of HR anymore. It was part of every team's goals. New hires got a short guide on inclusive communication during onboarding. Vendors were asked about accessibility features before contracts were signed. Even the holiday party had interpreters and sensory-friendly quiet zones. But the biggest change wasn't in the policies, it was in the culture. People started speaking up. A designer with dyslexia suggested using dyslexia-friendly fonts and client decks, and the team adopted them company-wide. An employee with chronic pain shared that standing meetings were hard, so now every meeting had seating options. No one made a big deal out of it. It just became normal to ask, "How can we make this work for everyone?" She never took credit for it. She knew she was just one thread in a much larger tapestry, but she also knew that sometimes all it takes is one thread to start the weave. One rainy afternoon, she sat in her office. Yes, she finally had her own small office, near a window with good light, reviewing feedback from the latest workshop. A knock came at the door. It was the intern coordinator holding a folder. "We've got a new intern starting next week," she said with a smile. "She's deaf, and she specifically asked if you'd be here." Her breath caught. "She did?" "Said she saw our website, how it's fully accessible, how you're listed as part of the leadership team, and she knew this was a place where she wouldn't have to fight to be heard." They both stood there for a moment, silent, letting the weight of that settle. Then the coordinator added, "She also asked if you'd be okay with her shadowing you sometimes." "Of course," she said, voice soft but sure. "Tell her I'll save her a seat." After the coordinator left, she leaned back in her chair and looked out the window. Raindrops traced slow paths down the glass. She thought about her brother, now thriving in his own career, proud of her but never surprised because he'd always known she had this in her. She thought about that first morning, when she walked in as an intern, head down, hoping not to be noticed. Now, people noticed, not because she demanded attention, but because she made space for others to be seen. A few weeks later, the new intern started. Her name was signed with a flick of the wrist and a gentle tap near the heart. Bright future. She was sharp, curious, and unapologetically herself. On her second day, she signed to her, "You made this possible for me." She shook her head. "No," she signed back. "We're making it possible together." That became their quiet motto. Not "I did this," but "we're building this." The work never ended. There were still missteps, a captioning error here, a poorly worded form there, but now, instead of ignoring them, people fixed them quickly, humbly, without shame. One day the CEO stopped by her office. He didn't come with fanfare or a big announcement. He just leaned in the doorway and said, "I got an email from a client this morning. Said they chose us over a bigger firm because your team actually listens." She smiled. "That's the best kind of win." He nodded. "You know, when I first saw you step into that meeting, I thought, that's the kind of person we need more of. But I was wrong." She raised an eyebrow. "I don't need more people like you," he said. "I need to build a place where everyone can be like you, where they don't have to hide who they are to belong." She didn't say anything, She just looked at him, and in that look was everything. Gratitude, understanding, shared purpose. Later that week, she stood in front of the whole company at the monthly all-hands meeting, not on a stage, just at the front of the room. She spoke aloud for those who could hear and signed for those who couldn't. Behind her, a live captioner typed every word on the screen. "I used to think being quiet meant being invisible," she said. "But I've learned that silence can be powerful too, when it's full of listening, when it's ready to act, when it makes room for others to speak." She paused, hands resting gently at her sides. Inclusion isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to try, to learn, to do better. And every single one of you has done that. That's what makes this place special. No one clapped right away. They just looked at her, really looked. And in their eyes, she saw what she'd always hoped for. Not admiration, but connection. After the meeting, people didn't swarm her with praise. They just went back to their desks, a little more thoughtful, a little more aware, and that was enough. That evening, as she packed up to leave, she passed the old conference room, the one where it all began. The door was open. Inside, a small team was setting up for a client call. She saw the interpreter already seated, the captioning software running, the printed materials in large print and braille on the table. No one had to ask. They just knew. She walked on, smiling to herself. The city lights blinked on as she stepped outside. The air was cool, the streets alive with movement. She didn't rush home. She walked slowly, savoring the quiet pride that came not from being celebrated, but from knowing she'd helped make something better. Back in her apartment, she made tea and sat by the window just like she used to. But now when she looked out at the city, she didn't feel small. She felt part of something, a ripple that had become a wave, not because she shouted, but because she showed up with open hands and an open heart. Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother. "Saw your workshop video. You're changing things." She typed back, "We all are." And as she turned off the light that night, she knew one thing for sure. The world didn't need more noise. It needed more people who listened and then acted. She'd found her voice. Not in words, but in the quiet courage to build a world where everyone could be heard, seen, and valued, exactly as they are. And that, more than any title or office or promotion, was the real success.